We're going to talk about joy today. I'm going to share for just a few minutes looking at Matthew, and then Britt's going to come up in a little bit to share even more personally for her how joy has been shaping her. She's looked at the Gospel of Matthew, living her life. But as we start, I want to do it with a question that you're going to look at, which isn't what I was looking at. There we go. A statement that's going to be followed up by a few verses. So we've been looking at the Gospel of Matthew for just under a year now. We've attacked it from multiple different ways. We've lingered in it. We've meditated in it. Some of us had dreams about it. Other ones had nightmares. Others have been like, are we still doing Matthew? And like, cool, we're only halfway through. Are we going to keep going with Matthew? Lots of questions. But as we do it and as we look at joy, I want us to recognize something. In the Gospel of Matthew, joy, that Greek word kara, just so you know, I went to seminary, is used 6 times in the book. It's not just an emotion, but it's a signpost pointing to the breaking in of God's kingdom. So whether in the discovery of Christ's birth, the reception of the word, the recognition of the kingdom's value, the celebration of resurrection life, this joy, this kara, this word that Matthew uses reflects the heart of the gospel. God's renewal of creation and the invitation to join him in his purposes. It's a response that wells up for Matthew as he encounters these different dimensions of what it means when Jesus and his kingdom show up. A joy is a natural, or you could say supernatural, response when heaven and earth begin to come together in Jesus, and we behold that glory in all of its diverse implications. That is a mouthful, that is a mindful, that is a heartful. But as we look at Matthew, I think this is what Jesus is inviting us into. As we come into this Advent season, what's our response to Jesus arriving and then longing for the day when he will arrive again? This kara, this joy, is meant to be one of the responses the people of God have. I said it's used 6 times. Each of those has a notation in that definition. The first time it's used, Matthew 2:10. Charlie talked about this last week. When they, the Magi, saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. The Magi's joy here signals that God's promised king has been born, not just for Israel, but for the whole world. Their joy, then, is an overflowing and an extravagant joy, and it mirrors the kingdom's arrival in the book of Matthew, something worth crossing distant lands to celebrate. That's what they experienced. And they weren't even people of God. They were far off. They were magicians. They were sorcerers, as Charlie told us. But when they experienced God's grace, it did something to them where they realized they were welcomed into the story. Matthew 13:20, it's used again. This time it's in the parable of the sower when they're sowing the seeds. It talks about the one to whom the seed was sown on rocky places. This is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. And if you remember the story, though, the one who receives it with joy and is the rocky soil doesn't actually go on to grow with real depth. There's an invitation and an experience and even a warning with joy that as we receive, we must continue to walk. As we believe, we must continue believing and receiving. And it's possible for us to get really excited about the arrival of the kingdom and our roots to rot out underneath of us. So yes, let us be joyful, but in our joy, let us continue to seek out a rootedness that comes from the gospel and the kingdom's arrival. That's why we regularly remind our church the kingdom is here. Third time it's used, Matthew 13:34. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure in the field, which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it, he goes and sells everything he has and buys that field. That one's coming up again in a little bit, so I'm not going to talk about it. Matthew 25:21. This is the parable of the talents. When, remember, the master had gone away and he set different people in charge of different amounts. And he said, hey, what I want you to do is steward my resources, steward what I've given you while I'm gone. And when I return, I'll pay you back for it, right? So he goes away to a far-off land, and some of the servants are able to multiply what they've been given. And then the one at the end just says, I don't know, I'm not going to do anything with this, and just kind of like sits on it. We're going to look at this a little bit more in the beginning of January, but what I want us to see out of this one is the joy of the master. He says, the master says to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy, this kara, of your master. A participation in the mission of God in the season between his first advent and his second advent, according to Jesus, is an invitation not only into work, but the joy of the master. A lot of times we get stuck on the word master and we miss the word joy. John would tell us in the garden when Jesus is praying for over that we can enter into that joy right now. That was actually Jesus' prayer, that their joy would be full or filled up. This experience of being joyful is one that Jesus prays for us and is somehow linked within our participation in the work that he's given us to do. Especially in this season when he came once and we wait for him to return. Somehow this joy that we experience is not just experienced now, but multiplied out in the next act of the story, which, according to Missio, is the foggiest of all of our understandings of the acts of the story. We get creation a little bit right. There's some questions. There's some real questions. But there's also, I get it, God did it. The rebellion we get. This world's messed up, and it's because human beings rebelled against a good God, and this is the effect far as the curse is found, all that stuff, fantastic. We look at the promise, and we recognize God made some promises, and he fulfilled them. That's fantastic. We look at Jesus, and we've been doing that in redemption, and that's the next act of the story. We're like, oh, Jesus came, he lived, he died, he rose again, he brought his kingdom. It's already here, fantastic. Like we wrestle through that, we get that. The church has been sent out to be the people of God, filled by the Spirit of God, sent on the mission of God, experiencing the love of God, like all of that. We're like, all right, that's what I live. There's still some mystery, but that's what I live. But that act of the story that comes at the end, the restoration of all things, Matthew calls it the renewal of all things. I think we've got some fuzziness around that. So we'll look at that in January, because I have some fuzziness about it, but I'm at least going to point us a direction. But what I want us to see is that the joy that even we experience right now is going to be wrapped up into a greater joy someday. And so what we experience in part, one day we will experience in even more fullness. And that's an invitation of Jesus around joy in the Gospel of Matthew. The very last time that it's used in the Gospel of Matthew is Matthew 28, verse 8. And it's talking about the women. And so he says, they left the tomb. Jesus had died, been in a tomb for 3 days, and risen again. They showed up. Jesus isn't there. They talked to the angels, right? And they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to report to his disciples. A response to the resurrection life, a response to recognizing that the resurrection had changed everything, that God's new world had broken in, led them to experience great joy. And I love it, and also fear. I'm not really quite sure what this means, but I'm really excited about it. I mean, that can be our experience of Christianity sometimes. I'm not quite sure what all of this means, but Jesus and his kingdom coming, I'm really excited. I needed healing, and I received healing. I needed forgiveness, and I have forgiveness. I needed a new creation because this one's broken, and God's bringing that to be. And it results in the proclamation of hope to the entire world, right? So this experience of joy leads to a proclamation of hope, which is fantastic. And so as heaven breaks into earth, Jesus and his kingdom arrive. What I'd love for us to do is spend a few minutes passing the mic around and just saying, what miracles, moments, or movements of God prompted joy for you this year? One of the ones that just did this week. And so there's a bunch of these. Matthew used this word in a lot of different ways. And so there's a lot of diversity of even how maybe you experienced it this year. But I would love to hear some of those stories. One of the things that brought me joy this week was Laura let me know that they've started building that. We started off 2024 praying over, should we collect resources to help build a school in the Eastern Sahara? And I mean, in some ways that seems like a no-brainer, right? But like at the end of the day, it takes us working our jobs, providing things, saying no to some things to say yes to this. And she sent pictures, and we'll bring them next week, a video of them starting to clear out use that word loosely because it was already desert, but clear out and start to stack the bricks that are going to make this school that kids on the other side of the world are going to get to learn. Not only that, but they were able to print off the Gospel of Matthew for the first time in the language of the people that she's loving and serving. So her team's also been working to translate the Gospel of Matthew and literally coming off of the printer, which, by the way, that you all helped to provide as well. The Gospel of Matthew is going to be in the hands of everyday people and be able to be read over women and men and children who have never heard it in their own tongue before. Like, that brings me a whole lot of joy. Some of the kids and the adults in this room said, here's I'm going to do without my money for my own, whatever else I want to spend it on, right? My V-Bucks or my Starbucks, right? Either way, it's grown-ups, adults, kids, we got it all, right? V-Bucks are what go with Fortnite, in case you're wondering, grown-ups. Like, that's a thing digitally. Got you. And Starbucks is the drink that's supposed to sell coffee and actually sells milkshakes that grown-ups like to go to. And so those two things, put them together. But said, hey, I'm going to do without, and some of it more significant than just a Starbucks or a V-Buck, but God sees all that. And us saying, hey, I will do without so that others can experience this. There's literally bricks being stacked and people having jobs and kids about to be able to learn for a year-round school instead of just when the weather permits, which is super exciting. That's participation in the work of God. That brings me joy. I know that's a big story, and yours might be like, I looked into the face of my child. That's absolutely beautiful as well. But what are some of those stories? What this year prompted joy? And I'm going to hand you the mic, and you can share it. We'll pass it around for a little while, and then Britt will come up and share with us. I hope you hear that from one-handed grabs that may or may not have happened to different flavor profiles, to the hug of a child, to a realization from Scripture, to a friend checking in, to a job being provided, to God stepping in and drawing us nearer to himself. Each of these moments are the normal things of life, but done with Jesus, there's so much joy in there. That there is not the delight of the sports that are played or being accepted and making a team, that is part of how God wired us, and there's something in us that's creation good, and we should celebrate that and never lose that. But also recognizing that the things that we receive from God's hand, whether financial provision or food or shelter or the ability to bless somebody else, each of those things, again, are things given by God. And they're meant to instill not pride in ourselves, but joy at what God's done. And so I do want to leave us with this because for us to recognize that joy isn't only found in the absence of grief, because we didn't go around and share the heavy moments of this year, and there were plenty. Every person that shared a joyful moment could also go maybe even deeper at the depth of loss. What was experienced this year in brokenness and disruption and death and loss and loneliness and things not turning out the way we expected them to, and disappointment. God, why wouldn't you do this, and why did you do this? All of that wrestling is also the stuff of faith. And so joy doesn't require there to be no grief. There is a day coming when there will be no more tears, and there is a day coming when there will be no more loss and no more sadness and no more disease and no more death. There is a day coming, but we're not there yet. And so the invitation of Advent is an invitation into the tension of both, yes, we acknowledge grief and it is there, and we mourn and we cry and we experience that, but also in the midst of that, with the arrival of Jesus and his kingdom, we always have a source of joy as well. Galatians would tell us that joy is one or part of the fruit of the Spirit. And so as our roots sink down into this story and are entangled with others that we call this community, may the result be joy-filled lives that don't avoid the hardships, but are able to embrace this gift that we call joy. We're going to continue sharing some stories. Brittany's going to talk a little bit longer than some of you did, so I'm going to ask her to come up. She's going to come up and share with us a story. And then just for those of you that track the liturgy, we will then do a song, and then we will do communion, and then we will be sent out with a final song. And then shirts versus skins if you're in. Not all of you. Let's go ahead and say, come.
Okay, I thought it was funny that Kevin asked me to share on joy because I was sadness for Halloween, and I love sad things. So I was like, of course, he's going to ask me to share on joy. I legitimately had that response when you asked me inside. I was like, could you pick a different week? I don't want to do joy. But it's always good to push into the things that we avoid. Or so, we tell other people that. So I tell other people that. Okay, so 2 stories came to mind as I actually came to mind in some time I'd spent in the prayer room one of these weeks since Easter. That's a joy, as well as that space, Matt, that you've curated and listened to the Spirit on. That's been a joy for me this year. A new rhythm weekly, showing up there early morning when I don't want to. And in that space, I was reminded of 2 stories, and we'll look at Matthew a little bit, but just real quick. So I lose things. Does anybody else lose things in here? All the kids raise their hand. Kevin's a lose. Okay, yeah. Kobe, he is admitting. Yeah. So, yeah, if you're like, I can't find my keys a lot. And Keller's laughing because he knows that's true. Or it's kind of a running joke like that when I first leave the house, like to head to work, you know that I'm going to show back up pretty quickly because I'm going to realize I forgot something. And by forget, I mean I don't know where it is, so I have to go find it. But what's also interesting about me is that I'm a good finder. So I lose a lot of things, but I'm also a good finder. And everybody has somebody in their world or house who is the finder of things, right? Is anybody the finder of things in their house? Oh, Marianne, yep, Leslie. Okay, Isaiah is the finder, nice. You guys lose things and find things at the same time? Okay, just the loser. The loser and the finder. I'll let Jake work that one out later. So I'm also the finder of things, so if somebody's looking for something, they're also going to come to me to trace it down, because somehow I lose things, but I also can kind of puzzle where something has been. So the adventure of finding something, which we're currently on literally right now because we've lost Keller's football. So we're trying to find it because the one before that got eaten by the dog, and so then we just got another one that now is lost, right? That's how that goes. But it's a lot of tracing. It's a lot of tracing where you've been and what happened, where you saw it last, when you remember it being where it was, and then you put all those pieces together, and then you find it. And if you've ever been looking for something, an object, and then you find it, I was reminded of it is a very special joy when you find that object that you've lost. And so it was reminding me of this retracing of the story, the true story, and retracing where we've been to arrive to Jesus being born. Like it's a great joy of something that was, we don't know how this is going to happen. We have a lot of ideas about it. People keep telling stories about how it's going to happen. We're not sure. Oh, is it this? Oh, nope, it's not that. Is it this person? Nope, it's not that. We're tracing all that history, and then we come to get to find Jesus. And as we kind of retrace our own histories and the story we find ourselves in Jesus, I think there's a lot of joy in that and being found. So I'm going to read this really short, it's only a couple verses, in Matthew, about somebody who found something as well. So this is Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. So there's this process, this sort of tracing of something lost and then finding it. Like the gospel, Jesus being born, I think for those of us who know this story and have been walking with Jesus for a while, there's a lot of joy in remembering what that process was like when we found it, when we were lost and then we were found. Okay, so that's one story. The second story I have for you is I was thinking about these objects, right? So lose my keys, can't find the football. There's things that we have lost and then we find. But there's also something that happens like that in relationship as well. And a part of my story growing up is that my dad left a lot. So he was in professional sports, baseball. For those of you who are like, what sport? So he would leave and then come back, leave, come back. He still does. So my whole life. And there's always this experience of that leaving that does create, obviously, a lot of like sadness and ache. And there's always a countdown, though, and there always was growing up, a countdown to when we would see him again. And that experience of getting to see, I remember that feeling of getting to see my dad again, is just an eruption of joy, right? The running, the hugging, the laughter, the excitement, the being close, being in each other's presence. It's a special kind of joy because it's not like we just saw you last night or we went to bed and then we woke up. If you just saw somebody, you're probably not that excited to see them again the next moment. But when it's been a while, there is this like growing ache, and then it erupts into joy. And so it reminded me of this second Advent that we're in, of as we have been apart from Jesus, he left, but he gave us his Spirit. So much different than my childhood experience with my dad. Our experience with Jesus is that he hasn't left, and that he stays with us, and then he's given us his Spirit now. And so we do long and ache for that full arrival, but we also sit in so much joy every moment as he finds us. In the prayer room, that day that these stories came to mind, I had felt that sense of just kind of lost, in that part of the week, just being like, where am I? What am I doing? What's going on? And that return of the Spirit being close, there was just this eruption of joy. Like, oh, okay, I know who I am. I know where I am. I know who's with me, right? Like all of those things that just rush back, and the joy in that and being close to Jesus. So as we remember, and we trace back, and in a moment, the band is going to sing. And we're going to actually sing King of Kings, which is essentially a retracing of the whole story. So we'll start, with baby Jesus and the whole thing. Actually, we start before that. I think we start the creation of all things there. So as we sing, we're going to retrace that story and sort of thinking about it like going on an adventure to go find that hidden treasure and to experience the joy of finding it again, even now together in this moment. And the reminder of when we return back to Jesus, it's often not because we are always finding him, but that he is always finding us because he has sent his Spirit to be with us now. And so receiving that, I guess, with joy, and allowing Jesus to find us right now as we long for that fullness of him coming again and us being reunited fully. So we're going to sing, and you guys take a second and reflect on those stories that you just heard. If there was one that even sparked joy getting to hear, I know it sparked joy for me even just to hear friends share stories. On the journey of enjoying sadness so much, and then the longer that I sit in all the grief and all the trauma and all the sadness with others, just because that's a part of the calling that God's given me vocationally, the more that joy is very curious to me, and is even more rich. So maybe there's just a little bit of an encouragement in the sadness, to maybe be on a little bit of the lookout for joy.